After my mom's funeral, my brother stood in front of everyone and said, "Mom left me your entire house, so you need to move out immediately." He even waved around a will as proof. I just smiled and said, "Is that right?" Because what he considered as proof was fake will. I, 34M, watched my brother wave that piece of paper around like it was a trophy, and something cold settled in my chest. Mom had been gone for 3 days. 3 days since the cancer finally won. 3 days since I'd held her hand in that hospital room while she took her last breath. My brother hadn't made it to the hospital in time. He'd been busy, he said. Always busy. The funeral reception was winding down. Relatives clustered in small groups throughout the house, speaking in those hushed tones people use around death. Aunt Carol was washing dishes in the kitchen. Uncle Pete sat in Dad's old recliner, the one Mom refused to get rid of even after Dad passed 5 years ago. I'd been moving through the rooms in a fog, accepting condolences, nodding at stories about Mom's kindness, her strength, her stubborn refusal to ask for help even when she needed it most. Then my brother stood up in the middle of the living room and cleared his throat. Everyone turned to look at him. He'd always had that gift, commanding attention without really trying. 2 years older than me, always the golden child, always the one with the big plans and bigger promises. He'd moved to California 6 years ago for a startup opportunity that never quite panned out. He came back maybe twice a year, always with excuses about why he couldn't stay longer. He told everyone he had an announcement to make. His voice carried that false solemnity people use when they're pretending to be sad but really aren't. He said Mom had left specific instructions about the house, and he wanted to be transparent with everyone about her final wishes. Then he pulled out the paper. He explained that Mom had left the entire house to him. The house where I'd lived for the past 8 years, ever since my divorce cleaned me out financially. The house where I'd taken care of Mom through 2 rounds of chemo. The house where I'd installed the walk-in shower when the old tub became too dangerous for her. The house where I'd spent countless nights sleeping in a chair next to her bed when the pain got too bad for her to be alone. My brother said Mom had been very clear in her will. He needed everyone to witness this moment of transparency. He was giving me 2 weeks to pack my things and find somewhere else to live. He understood this was difficult timing, he said, but Mom's wishes had to be respected. Aunt Carol dropped a plate in the kitchen. The crash seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. I looked at the paper he was holding. Even from across the room, I could see the letterhead. Davidson and Associates, a law firm in town. The document looked official enough, I supposed, if you didn't look too carefully. I asked him if that was right. My brother nodded. He said he knew this was hard for me to hear, but Mom had made her choice. He suggested I might want to start looking at apartments in the area, maybe something small and affordable. Uncle Pete stood up from the recliner. He asked my brother if he was seriously doing this at Mom's funeral reception. My brother put on his wounded expression, the one he'd perfected as a kid when Mom caught him doing something wrong. He said he wasn't doing anything except honoring Mom's wishes. He hadn't wanted to bring it up so soon, but he needed to be back in California by the end of the month, and there were logistics to handle. He needed to list the house with a realtor. That last part made Aunt Carol come out of the kitchen. She asked what he meant about listing the house. My brother explained that he'd be selling it, obviously. He couldn't maintain a property across the country, and the California real estate market was expensive. He needed the capital. He was sure Mom would understand. I watched several relatives exchange glances. My cousin Sarah's husband whispered something to her. Uncle Pete's face had gone red. I told my brother I'd like to see that will. He hesitated for just a second, then walked over and handed it to me. He said I could read it myself if I didn't believe him. Mom's signature was right there at the bottom. I looked at the document. It was dated 6 months ago. The language was formal, full of legal terminology about bequests and assets and last wishes. It stated clearly that upon Mom's death, the house at 447 Maple Street would pass to my brother, along with all furnishings and personal effects. My name didn't appear anywhere in the document. Mom's signature sat at the bottom, witnessed by 2 names I didn't recognize. I asked my brother where he'd gotten this. He said Mom had sent it to him 3 months ago. She'd wanted him to have it in advance, to avoid any confusion later. He'd had it notarized in California as an extra precaution. That was when I knew for certain. I told him that was interesting, because Mom hadn't been able to hold a pen 6 months ago. The chemo had caused severe neuropathy in her hands. I'd had to help her sign birthday cards by steadying her wrist. I'd watched her frustration as she struggled to write her own name. By 6 months ago, I was signing checks for her, managing her accounts with power of attorney she'd granted me a year earlier. My brother's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He said Mom must have had a good day. The doctors had told him she had periods of improvement. I asked him which doctors had told him that, since he hadn't spoken to any of Mom's medical team in over 2 years. I knew because I'd been at every appointment. I'd been the one on all the HIPAA forms. I'd been the one the nurses called when test results came back. Aunt Carol moved closer. She said she remembered visiting 6 months ago, and Mom couldn't even hold her coffee cup properly. My brother said we were misremembering. Grief did that to people. But the document was legal and binding, and it had Mom's signature. I told him he was right about the signature. It looked exactly like Mom's signature from about 10 years ago, before her hands started shaking. Before the arthritis and the neuropathy. It was actually a very good copy of her signature from that time period. I should know, because I'd been scanning Mom's old documents for the past year, getting everything organized for exactly this kind of situation. I'd seen that signature dozens of times. Uncle Pete asked what I meant by copy. I explained that Mom's signature had changed noticeably over the past 5 years. The tremor in her hands meant her letters weren't as smooth. There was a distinctive wobble to her capital letters. The signature on this will was too clean, too steady. It looked like someone had copied it from an old document, maybe something they'd found in Mom's files during one of his rare visits. My brother's face went pale. He said I was making serious accusations. I told him he was right, I was. I asked if he wanted to know what else I'd noticed about his will. The letterhead for Davidson and Associates had the wrong address. The firm had moved locations 4 months ago. I knew because I'd worked with them extensively during Mom's estate planning. The real one. The one Mom had actually created with her actual lawyer. My cousin Sarah asked what I meant by the real one. I said Mom had updated her will 14 months ago, when she first got the terminal diagnosis. She'd wanted everything clear and organized. No confusion, no fighting. She'd been very specific about her wishes. She'd used Davidson and Associates, but she'd worked with Janet Miller, the senior partner. Janet had come to the house twice because Mom was too weak to go to the office. My brother started to say something, but I kept talking. I told everyone that Mom's actual will left the house to both of us, split 50-50. She'd set it up as a trust. I had the option to buy out my brother's half at market value minus 20%, or we could sell and split the proceeds. Mom had included a clause that if I'd been living in the house and serving as her primary caregiver at the time of her death, I'd have 18 months to make the decision. She wanted to make sure I wasn't pressured into anything during the grief process. The room was completely silent. I pulled out my phone and opened my email. I showed my brother the attachment. It was the real will, the one Janet Miller had sent me a copy of last week when I'd contacted her about beginning the estate process. I'd forwarded it to my own email for safekeeping. My brother stared at the phone screen. He said that didn't prove anything. I told him he was welcome to call Janet Miller on Monday and verify it himself. In fact, I'd already scheduled a meeting with her for Tuesday afternoon. She'd been expecting both of us to attend, since we were both beneficiaries. I'd assumed he'd want to be there to discuss the details. Aunt Carol asked how my brother had gotten Mom's signature. I said I had a theory about that. 3 months ago, during his last visit, I'd found him going through Mom's filing cabinet in the study. He'd said he was looking for old family photos. I thought it was odd at the time, since the photo albums were in the living room, but I'd been too busy managing Mom's medication schedule to think much about it. I was guessing he'd found some old document with Mom's signature and either traced it or scanned it. My cousin Sarah's husband said that was fraud. I agreed. Forging a will was a serious crime. It was also pretty stupid, since any lawyer or court would immediately spot the problems with the document. The wrong firm address. The suspicious signature. The lack of proper witnesses. The fact that Davidson and Associates would have no record of ever preparing such a document. Uncle Pete told my brother he should leave. My brother's face went from pale to red. He said I was lying. He said I'd probably forged the email on my phone. He said Mom had always loved him more, and it made sense she'd leave him the house. That was when I stopped feeling cold and started feeling angry. I told my brother that Mom had asked for him every single day during her last month. She wanted to see him one more time. She'd held on for weeks longer than the doctors expected, and I'd thought maybe she was waiting for him to show up. I'd called him 16 times that last month. He'd answered twice. Both times he'd said he'd try to book a flight, but work was crazy. I told him Mom had finally stopped asking about him 3 days before she died. She'd looked at me with those tired eyes and said she understood he was busy. She'd said she was grateful I was there. She'd said she hoped he'd be okay after she was gone, because he'd always needed taking care of. I told him that was the last coherent thing she'd said before the morphine took over. The anger drained out of my brother's face. He looked smaller suddenly, older. Aunt Carol told him again to leave. This time he didn't argue. He folded up his fake will and stuffed it in his jacket pocket. He walked to the door without looking at anyone. Before he left, he turned back and said he'd been planning to give me half the money from selling the house anyway. He just wanted to simplify things. I didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say to that. He left. The door clicked shut behind him. Uncle Pete sat back down in the recliner. He said Mom would have been disappointed. Aunt Carol said Mom would have been heartbroken. My cousin Sarah came over and hugged me. She said she was sorry. She said it wasn't fair that I had to deal with this on top of everything else. The reception broke up about an hour later. People filtered out, offering final condolences, avoiding the subject of what had just happened. The house slowly emptied until it was just me, surrounded by Mom's things, sitting in the living room where she'd spent her last months. I thought about calling my brother. I thought about a lot of things. But mostly I just sat there, in the quiet house, feeling the weight of everything Mom had left behind. Not the house itself, not the physical things, but the responsibility of being the one who'd stayed. The one who'd been there. The one she'd trusted with her final wishes. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother. He'd typed out a long message about misunderstandings and grief in family. He said he'd made a mistake. He said he hoped we could move past this. I read it twice, then deleted it. Update 1. The meeting with Janet Miller happened on Tuesday. My brother didn't show up. Janet confirmed everything I'd told everyone at the reception. Mom's actual will was clear and legally sound. The house was split between us. I had 18 months to decide whether to buy him out or sell. Janet asked if I wanted to pursue charges over the forged will. She said she'd need to report it to the State Bar Association either way, since someone had impersonated her firm. She wanted to know if I knew who'd created the document. I told her I had suspicions, but no proof. She said that was probably for the best. Family matters were complicated enough without adding criminal charges. She also told me something I hadn't known. Mom had left a letter for me with the law firm, to be delivered after the will was read. Janet handed me the envelope. I waited until I got home to open it. Mom's handwriting was shaky but readable. She'd written it during one of her better days, maybe a year ago. She told me she knew taking care of her had been hard. She knew I'd given up a lot. She wanted me to know she'd noticed. She'd seen every sacrifice, every late night, every time I'd put my own life on hold to make sure she was comfortable. She wrote that she'd set up the will the way she did because she wanted me to have choices. She didn't want me to feel trapped by obligation or guilt. If I wanted to stay in the house, I could. If I wanted to sell and move on with my life, I could do that too. She trusted me to make the right decision for myself. She also wrote about my brother. She said she knew he'd struggled with responsibility his whole life. She'd enabled it, she admitted. She'd made excuses for him, covered for him, always believed his promises about doing better. She said she hoped he'd grow up eventually, but she wasn't going to structure her estate around that hope. She was going to protect the son who'd actually been there. The letter ended with instructions not to let guilt guide my choices. She'd lived a good life. She'd died knowing she was loved. That was enough. I read the letter 3 times, then put it in the safe with all of Mom's other important documents. My brother called that evening. He apologized. He said he'd panicked about money and made a terrible decision. He asked if we could split the house proceeds when I eventually sold it. I told him that was always the plan, according to Mom's actual will. But I wasn't planning to sell anytime soon. I was going to invoke my option to buy out his half. I'd already talked to a bank about a mortgage. There was a long silence on the phone. He asked if I was doing this to punish him. I said I was doing it because I liked the house. I'd put 8 years of my life into it. I'd replaced the roof, updated the kitchen, refinished the hardwood floors. I'd turned Mom's bedroom into a home office. I'd built a life here, and I didn't see any reason to walk away from it just to give him cash he'd blow through in a year. He said that wasn't fair. He needed money now. California was expensive. I reminded him that Mom's will gave me 18 months to make this decision. I was making it now. I'd have an official appraisal done within 30 days, and I'd pay him his 50% of the assessed value, minus the 20% discount Mom had written into the trust for this exact scenario. He started to argue, but I cut him off. I told him he'd tried to steal my home at Mom's funeral. He'd forged a will and humiliated himself in front of our entire family. He hadn't visited Mom during her final months, hadn't been there when she died, and had spent the funeral reception plotting how to profit from her death. If he expected sympathy or generosity from me after that, he was even more delusional than I'd thought. I told him he'd get his legal share, not a penny more. And then I hung up. Update 2. The appraisal came back at $420,000. My brother's share, after the trust discount, was $168,000. The bank approved my mortgage. The paperwork was handled by early March. My brother contested the appraisal. He hired a lawyer who claimed the discount clause was unfair and possibly unenforceable. Janet Miller shut that down in about 2 weeks. Mom's will was airtight. My brother's lawyer backed off. The money transferred to my brother's account in mid-March. He called to complain that it wasn't enough. The lawyer had cost him $15,000. He'd expected at least $200,000. I reminded him that he'd expected to get the whole house and leave me with nothing, so maybe he should consider himself lucky. He said I was holding a grudge. He said Mom wouldn't want us to be like this. I told him Mom had specifically structured her will to protect me from him. She'd known exactly what kind of person he was. She just loved him anyway, which was more than he deserved. That was the last time we spoke. Aunt Carol calls every few weeks to check on me. She asks if I've heard from my brother. I always say no. She says that's probably for the best. Some bridges are better left burned. Uncle Pete died in August. Heart attack, sudden and quick. At the funeral, several relatives asked if I'd invited my brother. I said I'd sent him the details. He didn't show up. No one seemed surprised. The house feels different now that it's fully mine. I've slowly been making changes, updating things to match my taste instead of Mom's. I repainted the living room. I got rid of the old recliner Pete used to sit in. I converted the garage into a woodworking shop. Sometimes I still expect to hear Mom calling from her bedroom, asking for water or help adjusting her pillows. Those moments are getting less frequent, but they still catch me off guard. I found Mom's wedding ring last week, tucked in a drawer in her old dresser. She'd stopped wearing it years ago when the arthritis made it too painful. I'd forgotten it existed. It's simple, just a thin gold band, worn smooth from decades of wear. I put it in the safe with her letter. The house is quiet most days. I work from home now, freelance consulting that pays better than my old job. I have friends over sometimes. I'm dating someone new, a woman I met at the coffee shop downtown. It's early still, but it feels promising. Life moves forward the way it always does. My brother is still in California. According to his sparse social media updates, he's working for a tech company doing something with marketing. He posted a photo of a new car a few months ago. Aunt Carol said he'd messaged her asking about how I was doing. She told him to ask me himself if he cared. He didn't. I don't think about him much anymore. When I do, I mostly feel tired. Not angry, just tired. Tired of his excuses, his schemes, his endless capacity to disappoint people who cared about him. Mom's letter is still in the safe. Sometimes I take it out and reread it, especially on hard days when I question whether I made the right choices. Her handwriting always reminds me that someone believed in me enough to build their legacy around that belief. The house on Maple Street is mine now. Not because I fought for it, but because Mom knew I'd earned it. Because she'd watched me show up, day after day, when it mattered most. That's worth more than any inheritance.